I know you started an online magazine called
Right.
Friends, and you also had a web design company called Web Mutiny. But before that, you also had like an event management company where you would do workshops at schools for other kids. So, I'm thinking about, where did this entrepreneur bug suddenly hit you? And, what were you thinking when you started these sort of ventures? And how did this lead to, that career decision of maybe moving into web design and UX design eventually?
Mhm.
Because a lot of young people, and I'm speaking for myself as well, we struggle with that decision to make that career choice and stick to a particular career path. So how did you know, and how did the entrepreneurial bug start, and how did that lead to UX design and web design for you?
It's fascinating, and like especially the way you have crafted that question that helps me answer it very well. Is the entrepreneurship bug was also there during childhood as well. I can remember it. In fact, I remember one of the early days I joined an arts and crafts class in the summer camp, right?
Mhm.
And I made soft toys, and because I really liked doing them, so I made more than everybody else. And the teacher was actually a local a woman who used to have a shop and used to sell soft toys there. So I sold one or two pieces there, right?
Mhm.
So that was my first um, bug of like making money off of something that you created with your own hands. And when you make your own money and you work hard for it, usually like business and things like that are, at least from the families that I grew up in, was not very well thought about, like, or I wouldn't say looked down upon, but more like, oh, we don't do that stuff kind of approach. Like, like it's a family of like teachers and servicemen, and like that's what they've done for the longest time. So business is not in the blood of the family, so to speak, right? But my dad always had a bug for that as well. In fact, he tried opening magazine shops twice, and while growing up, he had a. I remember getting exposed to computers very early on. This was back in 1998 or something, the 90s, the 1900s, as the kids call it, call it these days. I got exposed to computers because we had a computer center where they would do computer training, like Lotus 123 and Word Power or WordPad or something like that. These were the softwares back then, and again, I got curious about that, and like so there was computers element and there was technology element that I was fascinated by. There was this arts and crafts element that I was passionate by, and because of that arts and crafts, I was also able to make some money. And
Mhm.
that kept repeating every now and then, like in summer camps. Like I would learn new stuff, like how to make greeting cards. So now I'm selling greeting cards, right? And unlike others, I made hundreds. Like so, even back then I was playing the sort of a volume game, and they would get sold out, right? Like, and
Yeah.
especially because I would think of like, what about Mother's Day card? What about Holi card? What about Diwali card? What about this card? So there was a whole range of cards, right? And
Mhm.
when you do so much of this kind of thematic thinking, that's when you start to also, without realizing, enter the initial bits of like graphic design and like the visual design thinking, and those aspects start to develop. So I think very early on, I started to distinct between the art side of creativity and the design side of creativity, which from outside may look very similar, but they're very different. In fact, I remember a particular experiment that I did that made it more clear, and I did not have words to articulate. Only years later, I would realize that was happening. I made a notice board like the schools have at my home, where
Mhm.
there'd be some theme. Like if it was Christmas coming up, like I would decorate my own notice board at my home with like Christmas
Mhm.
things and stuff like that. And that's when I started realizing, oh, there are patterns and there are symbols and there are, and there is this uh, templatic content kind of view where you fit, you design something where something else will fit in, or you custom paint something.
Mhm.
There are differences between the two. And that's how I think those were the initial bits of these things like design and entrepreneurship and stuff like that. And as I kept pushing that, I think finally there were some changes that later on my school happened where I remember stepping out more, like and my teachers also telling our parents like he doesn't talk much at school. I was that kind of kid, right? I would be secluded, but then my parents like stepped back a little, like ease the pressure a little, and I was encouraged to speak. Then when I started speaking, then I wouldn't shut up, right? To a point that then and ended up like in me still talking, creating content, and blah blah blah. I still haven't shut up. And also, I think I realized that when I spoke, and when I spoke, especially about the things I was passionate about, people listen. And not everybody, of course, but majority of the people listen, and
Mm,
people who cared about certain aspects were listening. People who could relate about that not being satisfied with just the answers given or listening.
mm,
Right? There were some of these themes that resonated with people, especially this one, like, are you satisfied with the answer? Are you really genuinely satisfied with this answer? What about that? What about that? And be like, oh shit, yeah. And and then they contribute. Like, what about that? Like, I still remember the pudding model of atoms, right? Like, I had doubts some days where I was like, something is fishy. I don't know what, but something is fishy for sure. Of course, what I thought back then wasn't the fishy bit, but you continue questioning whether this is the truth or not. And that finally led to, like, you know, me trying to start that magazine, because in during my teenage, I wanted to make a film,
mm,
and I wanted to get into filmmaking. And at that time, in ninth and 10th grade, especially when your board exams are coming in India, especially, right? That's like a terrible time to pick anything else other than studies, right? In fact, professional sports players, people who were playing at national level, were asked to, like, quit whatever they are doing and study for this thing, for this to make their career. And I was seeing everyone suffer. And
mm,
it absolutely makes no sense to me that at the time when we are struggling with our identity, with puberty, and so many thoughts and confusions, at that time you are kind of asking somebody, oh, you, by the way, just by the way, you will make a choice right now that will decide a career for the rest of your life.
yeah. Wow. I mean, that's
I
so
was
hard
like,
for someone young to do, right? So,
exactly. I'm like, this is the worst time.
mm,
What do you expect? I don't even know the world, like, like, I haven't been even exposed.
mm,
But I think so. That magazine and everything started from that point of view. Like, can I document all of this? And I'd gotten into a habit of diary writing, which later into around like online writing. Like, journaling turns into writing. This reading turns into learning about how magazines function and everything. And so finally, I started publishing online magazine, first in a PDF format, then in like typical blog format, and got other people to write. Like in the school, etc. There always were one or two people in class who were fascinated by writing. In fact, my grammar sucked, right? Like really bad. I'm still like terrible with grammar, English grammar. I never let that stop me. Like, I was like,
mm,
the thoughts are more important, and I was always encouraged by my teachers, like language teachers. They always had that relationship with me where they were really like they really encouraged me on the thoughts and the kind. They knew that I wouldn't, like, if it was an essay topic, they would actually read mine,
yeah.
because there would be unique content in there. The
Yeah.
only complaint they had, they were like, the English teacher was like grammar, and the Hindi teacher was like matra, right? Like, it's spellings for those who don't know.
Yeah, but
So,
it's so much better for the child to realize it themselves, because I think at that
right,
point of time it's really important to pick up on intent of what the child is trying to
right,
say, because they're already so worried about, all of us are so worried about judgment at that point. And you know and,
right.
and that's something we should be more mindful of, and as teachers as well, is that, especially when they're younger, the criticism, they take it really personally sometimes, and we need
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be so. I mean, that's amazing. Keep going, City. Like, with the
Yeah,
magazine.
and what you hit upon really makes sense, right? Because I remember being the only part I was discouraged for, which I think was partly I had a role to play in that, was around sports. So I never thought I was a sporty person till I recently started doing weight training, and I was
Mm,
like, oh, this is my kind of sport. Like, I love doing that. So, and I've heard so many people who left music who are like my current flatmate. She loves music, but early on she was discouraged from picking up music because her music teacher was like, no,
mm,
you're not gonna like pick up something else. But she's damn good musician, right? Like, now growing up, because of the teacher, it had that impact. Thankfully, mostly I had positive teachers around me, so that had an impact, right?
yeah.
And then all of these things, finally, like, these aspects keep coming together. And I think even my ninth and tenth, I was obsessed with what could combine all of these curiosities.
Mm,
And I still remember being told, and I think most of the people today will relate, include, I don't know about, I think you will relate as well. I was always asked to narrow down, pick one thing,
mm,
and I could never relate with that. I still can't relate with that. Why should I pick one thing? Like,
mm,
what kind of request is that, right?
mm,
They were like, oh, you can have a lot of interest, but you can't do everything. Sure, but I wasn't trying to do everything. I'm trying to learn everything because it's curiosity, right?
Yeah.
And what I later on realized was what people mean is like, I want to compartmentalize you,
Yeah.
right? And where do I compartmentalize you?
Yeah.
Because I try to put you in compartment of an artist, but then you start talking about money. Then I
Yeah.
put you in compartment of like an entrepreneur, then you start talking about like arts and feelings and emotions and colors. And I think over time I just kept changing labels,
Mm.
whichever fit better to whatever satisfied all of these things. I earlier thought filmmaking brought everything together, so I tried that, and I
Mm.
thought, okay, that's not happening. Let's try making an online magazine, like a media powerhouse, and this kind of thing. So it helped a little bit, but not quite there. Then
Mm.
I found startups, and I was like, oh, because I really like tech, and in between I started coding to make my own website. Then I got obsessed with coding, and this is around like eighth, ninth standard that
Mm.
I'm getting obsessed with coding, etc. So I was like, oh, this is damn nice. This is super cool. You can make your own website on the internet, and finally start getting exposure to internet. And that's when I had my first client as a freelancer. In ninth grade, I made my first $1,200, and that was the first earning I made on my own. And I remember transferring it from PayPal to my father's bank account because I didn't have a bank card back then. And him being fascinated by, are you sure you're not doing anything illegal? Like, how are you making money? So, but yeah, so that's where I kept finding new and new things which resonated better
Mm.
and kept switching, right? And I think that's where I had to be what you would call not care about, what people told me to pick.
Mm.
Even today, if you from outside, like even if you mentioned initially, like there's so many labels attached. If you think about it, even today I can't decide, right? And that
Yeah.
continues till today. Sure, like if I'm now smarter about using an particular label with certain people because they would understand that better, right? If I was talking to somebody in my industry, I would say that, hey, I manage design, and I manage product, like there's product management aspect as well, and I
Mm.
like to combine them both, right? And build modes for businesses with the sense. But if I was talking to, let's say, my mother, right, now she decides I just do design on computer,
Mm.
right? I design apps in her mind, right? And if I was talking to somebody really like not even like remotely related tech, I'll just say I do something on the computer, some IT engineering or something,
Mm.
right? So you realize how to modify those labels, and none of them are really true,
Mm.
right? You realize and make peace with that as well.
True.
So over time, what has happened is not that I've picked any particular thing,
Mm.
but I've planted 1,000 flowers, so to speak, and there are some that responded well, and like that relationship formed with those identities, right?